Welcome to Transjacked. Victims of the gender industry speak out. Erin Brewer and Maria Keffler of Advocates Protecting Children talk to people whose lives have been upended by gender ideology activism, including parents, teachers, detransitioners, and others who were exploited by unethical doctors, therapists, schools, and activists. Listen to their stories as they describe the damage being wrought on individuals, families, and society by the gender industry. Welcome to Transjacked, Victims of the Gender Industry Speak Out. I'm Maria Keffler.
I'm Erin Brewer.
And today we are here with Ute Heggen, a grass widow, who is going to tell us what that means. She's written a book about her experience. And I'm so excited that you're here today, Ute. I can't wait to hear more about your experience. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you both. I have such a high regard for you both and the work that you're doing slowly, carefully, methodically. And yes, so what this means is that my husband had a so-called sex change. And this happened, and I just, let me just explain. I will use the term trans widow. Also, I'm in that category, and I sort of use them intermittently now when I write on my blog. I have this blog, Ute Heggen, grasswidow.wordpress.com.
Do they mean the same thing? Does trans widow and grass widow mean the same thing?
No, but to me, they do. I mean, grass widow is an old, archaic, out of use term, although I've been told that there's a relation to marijuana. Like, if you don't have any, then you're a grass widow. That was, some younger person said that to me, and I was like, whoa. The who were and there actually is there was a girl band called the Grass Widows somewhere in California, and I don't know what they're.
But the concept is someone whose husband hasn't died, but has done something so profound that the woman cannot stay in a marital relationship.
Right. And the earliest citation in writing is from 1528. And to me, what this says is that way back in the past, women sometimes did separate from their husbands and live an honorable life, and they were given the honorific of being a widow, even though it was known that there's no grave. So hence my belief, I haven't been able to confirm this in the historic citations, but my belief is that, it's like a patch of grass. You don't have a grave to mourn at, but that I feel that it's pretty appropriate for someone like me, because the man I married is gone. That person even calls his old name a dead name, right? And this is what a trans widow is, but specifically a trans widow is a new word, a new phrase that I first heard from Tinsel Angel of transwidowsvoices.org, where my brief description of my experience is under Our Voices Bertina. She wanted me to take a different name for that. So, and I do have my book listed on as a resource. And so for me, I suppose there might be other women who would say that they're a grass widow because their husband abandoned them and they're having trouble getting divorced, or, there might be all kinds of reasons why you are no longer with the man you married.
And I want to hear your story about how that happened. But I also, one of the questions that maybe when you get to this place in the story is, what are a woman's options? I mean, when your husband announces, hey, that's my dead name, I'm no longer a man, now I'm a woman, like, what are the options? Yeah. So when you get to that place in the story,
this is a good segue, actually.
Well, so I just want to jump in because I interviewed another trans widow, and she said that when her husband first announced this new identity, they went to marital counseling, and the therapist looked at her and said, well, you just have to accept you're a lesbian now.
Yeah.
And I've heard that a couple of times.
Oh, yes.
That's how the therapists handle this.
So somebody else can make you change your sexuality. Isn't that conversion therapy?
Right.
It sounds
Yes.
like it, doesn't it?
Right. And you get called homophobic if you
They
say,
can
well,
do it
I'm
just by
right.
enacting it. I mean,
Yes.
that's what's so phenomenal. And so I, if you can get into sort of, how maybe initially just cover briefly when Nettie first announced this and how you responded. And I'd really also like to get into how you have been erased as a mother and
Yes.
how this whole movement has allowed women to be replaced by men who are claiming to be women.
Right.
Which I think is just
And
shocking.
motherhood is being
Motherhood.
deteriorated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for some reason, a man who claims he's a woman can say he's a mother, but
Right.
a woman who is a mother is a birthing person. We're not even.
Yes, I know. Isn't that, I think, the illogic, the depth of the illogic is quite remarkable. So this is actually one of the first explorations that we trans widows, when we talk to each other, we ask is, was it a revelation or was it a discovery?
Mm-hmm.
So the slightly more honorable way to admit your deception, if you are a man like this, is to sit down and say, I have something to tell you. My husband didn't do that. My husband was cross-dressing for probably 1 or 2 years in a very, programmatic way, calling business trips what was something else. And I discovered his diaries, because what happened was he came back from, this is a quite crazy scenario. I had brought the children, who were 1 and 4, my 2 sons, to Chicago, where my in-laws lived in a high rise near Lake Michigan. And it was maybe August. And yes, it was August. It was 3rd week of August, 1992. And he had been on a trip supposedly for his academic organization that he worked for, on a business trip to San Francisco. And he came back and all of his body hair was shaved off. And he was just doing things like rolling up the sleeves of his short sleeve shirt. And, he had recently started buying, pink type colors and stuff like that. But I mean, my father wore pink starting in the 1970s. One of his favorite shirts that I made a quilt out of after he died was all these pink stripes,
Well, and pink shirts were all the rage when I was in high school. I mean, for boys,
yeah,
they were always wearing
yeah. So I mean, it's a color. It's not. So.
But the shaving must have been disconcerting, especially.
Oh my goodness! I was absolutely in shock. I was like, oh my goodness, what has he been doing? What
Did you ask him about it at that time? Like,
yeah. Oh yes.
And what did he say?
He was very resentful. And he said, this is how I choose to appear. This is my choice. And so then I said to myself, okay, I have to, he's also being a little weird about the suitcase, right? And so I was like, something's in the suitcase. The suitcase has become Pandora's box. And so before we left Chicago to head up to Madison, where I'm from, for my niece's wedding, and I, for the next 4 days, I basically couldn't eat. So I really looked, very svelte in this wet dress that I wore to the wedding. So there I am in my in-laws high rise apartment. Nettie has taken the kids out to Lincoln Park or something to play while I'm finishing up the packing. My father-in-law is in his office in the apartment. My mother-in-law is out with Nettie and the kids. And so I even have to, like, when I started crying after I found these 3 sketchbooks with his quirky printing in them, describing all of his cross-dressing activities and how he would accept a wine from somebody on 8th Street in the Village. You know, we lived in Brooklyn at the time, so he was going into Manhattan.
His diaries very clearly detailed that he had been
Oh, yes.
cross-dressing.
Right.
Did you get a sense that he had been wearing your clothes?
I have thought about that a lot. I can't say that I found stretched out things or found or had missing clothes, but he did one time later, after 1995, when it all kind of finally ended. I allowed him for a brief time to stay in the apartment that I was living in. He would stay with the kids while I was going to my education classes in the graduate program at Brooklyn College, because I got the teaching certification. And he one time came to the door when I was coming home, and he was wearing my apron. Now, this was after, this was later. So I knew, and that was when it all ended. But I remember as soon as I saw that, I said, okay, he can't come over here anymore. That's it, because he's doing this behavior where he's putting on something of mine, and he was playing mommy, right? And later he used that in court, saying that he had given the children the food which Ute made. He didn't mention that detail, put them to bed, gave them a bath, all this stuff, but he had only been there for 2 hours. But he was
during that time, he was your mommy.
We were in this custody battle, right? So, but so then I told him, I actually tried to get a neighbor to mail me a package, like to my sister's house, whoever's address I had memorized. You have to remember that this is 1992. No cell phones. I didn't have a credit card. I had been at home since I had been an at-home mom, doing a life of child rearing while my husband pursued his career, and in fact also got further graduate credentials. And so I felt quite trapped, in terms of my financial agency. I really had no
agency. I get
incredibly
confused, because at least now there's sort of a schema for this out there. In 1992, there wasn't anybody talking about trans widowhood.
No. And I had heard of this, interestingly, because an accompanist, I did a BFA in dance for college, and in Milwaukee at the UW, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and there was an accompanist who never took another name as far as I know. He went by David, and he just kind of started dressing more and more female, and then he got fired. The dance department couldn't handle that at that time. And I was actually very kind to him. I allowed him to come in to the dance studios on Sundays when I had, the student key and stuff like that. And I'd let him play the piano while I warmed up. And then I had to put on my taped music for my choreography that I was working on. But I remember sitting on the piano bench next to him and saying, listen, you didn't go through your teenage years having a period and experiencing life as a female, and he was very distraught. He really cried, but I think there was a history of abuse there. He was from rural Wisconsin, and I think and the thing is, he was living as a gay man at that time. So
I think there's such a big difference between the AGP who is doing this as a sexual fetish versus the man who identifies as a homosexual, who's had sexual abuse issues, who is there's a difference. One is very predatory, and one is more someone trying to cope with
right.
It's a dissociative identity.
Yeah.
And it sounds, your story is, we're hearing, increasingly common, where, middle-aged man, wife and kids, decides to come out as AGP, or I should say as the opposite, as
Mhm.
trans. I hate using
Claiming
that word.
this, yeah, claiming, I call
Claiming
it cross-sex. I
yeah,
call it, he's
cross-sex
claiming a
identity and
cross-sex
wanting to stay in the relationship
identity.
and wanting you to sort of
Oh, yeah,
affirm
right.
him as a woman as
Yeah,
part of your relationship, which is really different than, what we're seeing too with, some rapid onset gender dysphoria stuff with boys. I mean, there's
yeah,
a lot of different categories, and I just wanted to make it clear that there are those different categories, that not all men
yeah,
who are
yeah. Well, I would say that after working in the field of special education extensively and studying, child development and trauma and things like that, I I see it all as body dissociation. I think it all comes under that umbrella.
even your husband, even an
Yeah.
AGP. Okay. Or
Well,
ex-husband, I should say.
I don't know. I wouldn't be able to tell you whether he's an AGP or whatever Blanchard would call a transsexual, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I don't, I think they're all kind of mixed in together, in terms of their own uh, socialization in this alternative identity,
Did
so
your husband, I'm just curious, did he want to stay in a marriage with you and
yes,
just
he
have
did.
you affirm him and you're a lesbian now?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And I was called homophobic, and that was kind of the whole focus of the therapy that he was going to. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. Like,
Mm.
there's this, he officially went to this Dr. Christine Wheeler, who still has some kind of a clinic where she does these diagnoses. I assume in one appointment, like she did for him, as she said in her sworn affidavit. But
So in one appointment, she was able to determine that Nettie was someone who was born in the wrong body, is what
yes,
the claim
yes,
is.
Well, and
Okay.
I'm
yes.
really
And
curious,
what's interesting is what?
I'm just curious, do any of these doctors ever tell anyone, no, I don't think you really are transgender? No, I think this is something else. Do any of them ever turn anyone away?
That's a good question. That's a good question, because they're afraid of now. I don't think they can,
Mm,
right?
probably
Because
not, yeah.
yeah, I don't think they can, because they'll be accused of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know. I mean, she stated in the, later she submitted this crazy affidavit into our divorce thing, even though I had never gone to her with Nettie. She had never met me. All of her knowledge of me was, third party. But she said, well, while quite rare a medical condition, and although known throughout history, there's no citation there, huh?
Mm.
Like you're talking about Joan of
Well,
Arc.
and she's saying it's a medical condition.
Right, right.
Hmm.
It's been treated medically in this country specifically for over 40 years. And I was like, she's saying this in 1992. And so I'm like, whoa, 40 years back from 1992, that's really quite sketchy. And then see, the thing is, there I was, I felt I invented a phrase called, I'm being accused of being pathologically logical,
Yeah.
because, I'm
Dare you have
saying
critical
this
thinking
doesn't
skills.
make any sense. And basically I've been saying this doesn't make any sense for 30 years. This is now 30 years on. We're in 2022. It was August, third week of August, 1992, when I found the diaries. I said to him that night that, I found the diaries in the morning. I tried to have a way to have it sent to me to kind of steal them, so that, because I knew that I needed proof, right? And later it came out that he I'll just try to quickly run through that early chronology, because I think that, the shock and trauma that you experience if you've been in this marriage for a long time, and nowadays maybe you'll hear trans widows say, oh, well, I knew he had this cross-dressing thing, but he said it was just a quirk that it was just during college, or it was something like this. And there was nothing like that. I never had, I've gotten a little bit, my feathers ruffled a little bit, occasionally when people have said to me, well, you must have known. You
Mhm.
must have,
How would you have
uh,
known?
you must have known that he was at least gay, or you must have, and it's like,
He
okay,
fathered two children. I mean,
have you heard of the closet? So, okay, so
Mhm.
he was in the closet, and suddenly I was in the closet that was behind that closet. Like, this was a very strange combination of Alice in Wonderland and Narnia. And that I was really not prepared, despite I had a lot of experience in the dance world. I knew a lot of gay guys. I was really offended that I got accused of homophobia, because
Mhm.
the majority of my male technique teachers during the 14 years when I danced were gay, starting from when I was 14. And this one guy was the ballet
To me,
teacher that I went to.
to
So
me, it seems like there's a big difference, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like there's a big difference between a man sitting down with his wife and saying, I love you, we've been in this relationship. I realize I'm not sexually attracted to women. I'm going to leave you. Which has got to be brutal.
yeah,
But that's really different than a man coming in and saying, I'm actually a woman. I'm your co-mommy and you're a lesbian.
yes,
There's a
Mhm.
fundamental difference there. It's
yes,
sort of, I mean, the first situation is the same as a man, any man coming in and saying, I'm having an affair, I'm leaving you, which
right,
is a horrible thing to have to deal with, but it's an
yes,
honest thing on some level. Whereas what
right,
Nettie was doing was was crazy making.
right.
Mhm.
And it was deceit that was sanctioned by these sort of pseudo medical people. I mean, this
Mhm.
Dr. Wheeler has a PhD in psychology,
And
you
what does
know?
that do to children? It's
Mhm.
hard enough
Right.
to explain, daddy and mommy are getting divorced, but now daddy's claiming to be mommy and trying to erase you completely as mommy. So you don't
Oh,
even,
my children were absolutely devastated,
yeah.
Mhm.
despite the fact of, that Christine Wheeler, though she admitted, in her writing that she had never met my children, but she made sure to say that it's really because any distress that these children have experience is going to be much more likely due to Ute's lack of acceptance of Nettie's true identity.
Even though
And
they're grass orphans. I mean, these are,
yes,
I
you
mean,
just invented a term.
Mhm.
they
They're
lost
grass
their
orphans.
father. Their
Yes,
father died or dissociated, or they rejected to the
yeah,
point they're not allowed to acknowledge him as
right,
father anymore. So
Well,
right.
and I would think
again,
too,
that's the
you have
difference.
you have sons, is that right? You have two
Yes, two
sons?
sons.
I think there's got to be an element. I mean, I've thought about this with siblings. If you have two same-sex siblings and one of them says
Mhm.
they're trans, that same-sex sibling must be like, does that person hate me because I'm this sex? I would think if your father does that as well, does my father hate me because I'm a boy because he doesn't want to be a boy anymore and he's
Oh,
rejecting?
they very much expressed some version of that. I don't think they used the word hate, but um there was
Well,
almost
and how do they know they weren't born in the wrong body? I mean,
oh, well, this is very interesting, because at that time, even those professionals, because this is, as she said, this rare condition,
Mhm.
they all said, you must reassure those boys that this will not happen to them. This is not genetic. There is no genetic component.
Oh,
It,
interesting.
yeah.
Because
And
today the narrative
yeah,
is they were born this way, and yeah, huh.
right. And then there are some people who surmise, based on zero science, that there is a genetic component. Even this guy Michael Bailey,
yeah.
who considers himself an expert on this.
Yeah, there's
Um,
really, it's to me it's just that how confusing it must be. I mean, again, divorce is hard enough on kids, but then to
yes,
compound that with you're losing your dad completely, basically. The man you
yes,
thought was your dad is now claiming this false identity, and you have to go along with that charade.
And you're not
or else
allowed to
you're considered
grieve.
hateful. Yeah.
You're not
No.
allowed to grieve. You're not allowed to question. You're not allowed to process your own pain. If
Yes.
you're experiencing pain, that's just evidence of you being a bigot.
And
Right.
then
And
the mom have to deal with losing your husband, losing your marriage, and then this trauma that's happening to your boys. I mean, you're in just
you're in, you're squeezed between a big rock and a hard place. It's a very small Grand Canyon.
Yeah. And no matter what you do, you're the
Yeah.
bad guy.
You're in the Grass Widow Canyon. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. And you can't do the right thing. The only right thing to do is be like those couples that go on, that went on Oprah,
Yeah.
where they stay together. And
Now you're talking about the only right thing to do in the eyes of the culture.
yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah, in the eyes of the culture.
As opposed to, yes, no, because I even have met trans widows who stayed to their, you know,
Well, like
to their detriment,
the
not
David Hayden.
not by their own fault, but
Mhm.
like there was one who then, you know, fell in love with a man because she's heterosexual. And then the ex-husband sued her for divorce based on infidelity.
Wow.
So the thing is,
Unbelievable.
you know, my advice is immediately you have to figure out how to protect yourself. This is as if this man is a serial philanderer.
Mm.
This is what you need. And it was just I remember just like and it was just such an odd situation. I see it sort of cinematically, like there's my father-in-law, right, who I feel is partly responsible for this because he did beat his children when they were young. Like
Mhm.
they had punishments that were getting whipped with a belt, at least the older two. And they both told me. So this is not something I'm making up, although I'm relatively certain that that's probably what Nettie says now. I mean, the father's now deceased, but I knew him as a difficult, unhappy person, and very easy, very hot temper, very easy to set off. And this is what I am sort of astounded and more than puzzled that the father personality for these guys who ideate to be the opposite sex, I am saying, you know, the first thing you do in good therapy is you start talking about your parents, you know, and everything, there's so many different aspects of this, even like no one was prepared to give me therapy, right? And although Nettie very badly wanted me to go to this Dr. Christine Wheeler, the parents apparently went for a total of 8 hours. That's what she claims. She also makes this claim that about the children, adjustments are made individually over time while interacting with the parent in public, at school, with playmates, and while with the other spouse and with relatives. Like, oh,
Can you go
okay,
into
you
it a
know,
little
they'll get
bit?
used to it.
Can you talk a little bit about that, the way in which he appropriated your role as mother? Because, you know, I was shocked when I read your book, the degree to which outside figures were complicit in affirming him as a mother. Even so far as court documents and school papers and such, and how he was able to do that. Again, can you just talk about that a little bit, and how that impacts your boys, that they went from, you know, and how it impacted you as a woman?
Right. Well, there's the famous story of the hipster mom over there in Park Slope in Brooklyn, where she said, she turned to me, we're walking up 7th Avenue after school, and she says to me, "Why are they calling you mom? You're the nanny." And the reason
Did she think that you were the nanny?
Yeah, and I said, "Oh my goodness, she thinks I'm 15 years." I mean, I was like, I have, thank goodness, I am somewhat unsinkable. And I sort of relate that to, you know, having had happy teenage years and having been a dancer and experienced sort of pure joy and movement, and I just really knew that I am going to hold on to my enjoyment of life with both hands, and I am not going to become so bitter, which is one, or I'm not going to become bitter, or I'm not going to let bitterness dominate my life.
So, Ute, I can't even imagine how it feels to have your husband be known as your children's mother and people thinking you're the nanny.
I know, but they thought that I was, 19 instead of 36.
Well, I guess that's a compliment in some degree.
I mean,
how did you
was like,
handle that?
oh, that's the advantage of being so stressed out that you get irritable bowel syndrome. People think I'm 19. And so I have all these thoughts. I've got this sort of my logical part of my brain saying, ha ha ha, that's kind of funny. And then like, and so, but what I did was and this is, my kids are in middle childhood, right? They don't need to hear what I just said. So there's stuff that I would just say that my kids would be like, what is she saying? I started talking about my contractions. I started talking about natural childbirth. I said, oh no, I can tell you about every contraction. I'm their mother. You want to hear about the first labor was 12 hours, but the second labor I walked during the middle part of it. And then we almost didn't make it to the hospital on time. I gave birth in 5 hours. Yay, and no epidural, no nothing. I did it the hardcore way. And
how did she respond? How did she?
She was like, oh. But the thing is, I'm not supposed to say that person that you think is the mother, like, and of course, what's going through her head is, oh, I'm supposed to be able to notice the big hands and the Adam's apple and the, different build and the 2 big feet. How did I miss that?
I was going to ask, did Nettie pass as a woman? Like, do people?
For some people. I mean, that was the thing
and that's such a hard question, because I hate to say this because it's very indelicate, but there are big, ugly women. I mean,
yeah. Right. So, or there are big, I wouldn't even say the word ugly. I would say
there are
big,
less
masculine,
handsome,
handsome
women.
Yeah, that's
right?
a much better way of putting it.
I actually feel now for any tall, angularly built woman, because there are going to be some people who start asking these questions and asking their pronouns and all this baloney.
I talked to a young woman who she would consider herself a butch lesbian, and she said she's so irritated when she goes out to dinner and someone addresses her as sir, or they ask her, oh, what pronouns do you use? And I'm like, I really feel for her, 'cause, yeah, that would be annoying.
Yeah.
And that's not, I know there's somebody else who just recently posted that she is a butch lesbian who now is regularly asked what her pronouns were. Never used to be. Everybody always used to know she was a butch lesbian, but now everybody has to be so careful.
Right.
And so, this is where everything has gotten so confusing. And I find myself even looking at people occasionally and I'm like,
well,
I never used to.
I know. And you think this is sort of the burden that we grass widows are left with too, because we start sort of looking sideways at people. And I actually developed a little bit of a fear of, first of all, running into Nettie in the dressing room in a department store, or the bathroom at the theater,
or the shower at the gym, or
oh gosh. Well, yeah, that's a reason for me to just do home gym, just do my old dance stuff on the floor, right? And so just I feel like I want to keep on kind of touching back to that day of discovery in 1992, because one thing that I will say about this process of writing in the Curated Woods and getting it published and making the decision to put in 50 nature photos and really consciously regard my work in the garden, with particularly butterfly gardening. And I've seen 3 today. I even saw, just out the window, I saw one great spangled fritillary. So,
Aw.
that's, it's very important. My advice, to anyone in my shoes who's younger and just going through this and stuff is, you've got to figure out your strengths. You have to figure out what you need for self-care.
Mm.
And, unfortunately, the way things are now, you have to face the attitudes in the press and in social media that are really against motherhood. That, I mean, there are people who have had the gall to say, oh, that Ute, she constantly misgenders her ex-wife. And I'm like, okay, no. And what's interesting is I thought, okay, when I first started the book, in fact, there was an evolution, because I thought, all right, I will try to be respectful, be kind, and say she for post 1996, when the operation occurred. And then as I was writing and realizing how to tell my story, which is valid because I am a woman,
Your
I
feelings
am a
are
mother,
valid.
I am a person, I am a writer, right? I have something to say. My whole message is diminished and really reamed. It's completely different if I start calling my former spouse
Mm.
my ex-wife, and if I start saying something like, oh, the other mother, or, I mean, my children are very upset with me for going public, even though I'm doing it under a pen name, and they don't talk to me.
Mm.
And I predict that we will talk to each other in about 10 years, because I think that's how long it's going to take. And I also think that their father, who now has, a stepson in, Nettie tried out dating men. I heard through the grapevine, through the single girl grapevine, I heard that Nettie did try dating men. A friend of mine dated a guy who had dated Nettie. We live in a big, small village. And, but then, he married a younger woman, and she got artificial insemination from a donor. And there's a child who's now 18. And I found out, actually, my older son talked about it, and didn't realize how much it hurt me. He told me, the kid would have been 16 at the time, that this boy believes that Nettie is my son's mother,
Wow.
the mother of both of them. And that my son had said, well, I'm going to call up Nettie and say, if you don't tell him, I will. And I doubt
I just want to ask, so does this young boy think that Nettie is a woman? Like, doesn't realize that
he
Nettie,
thinks his mothers are are
Mhm.
lesbians. And
what is that going to do to him
well,
when he realizes?
yeah, I know.
Wow.
Well, see, he lives in woke land, and he'll probably go to woke land college, is my guess. I think what will happen is that they're going to spend a lot of money, like that money that didn't get sent to me for child support. That money is probably going to go to this kid's, fancy college and stuff. And my sons are probably going to have a considerable amount of resentment. I mean, the other piece of this story, which is really counter to this victimhood narrative, is that my ex-husband is the chief operating officer of a tech company which serves museums.
And I am sorry to interrupt you, but I think I could be wrong, but did you write in your book that he was able to get some kind of a low interest loan or something because he claimed to be a woman
Oh, he got,
or a business, some
this
kind
is
of a perk?
much bigger.
Okay.
This is much, much bigger. And this is something that women who own businesses need to think about. That company, of which the entire executive suite, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, are all white men, and which, if, I've kind of looked around on their website and stuff, they do not appear to have anyone pictured who happens to be a person of color. They might have some people of Asian background working there. Their credentials are very Ivy League and stuff like that. However, there's a web page up about this tech company stating that it has designated special status with the General Services or agency, which is the federal government's contracting agency. And this is fulfillment of regulations passed by Congress, whereby minority owners of businesses and women owners of businesses have sort of an affirmative action to get government contracts. And this company has done archiving type of database work for the government. So this is because the COO claims to be a woman, and the timing of it happens to be that he committed fraud in court in 2007 when I sued him for non-payment of child support and non-payment of his commitment for the college tuition. And he did not include, he had to be then, this is, a little bit in the weeds, but he had to be getting equity in the company and be partially paid in equity in the company and be in a contract. The research, the little pieces of information that I got through looking up this federal agency was that he was in a contract from 2004 until 2025 to become 51% owner of this company. Now that might have changed, that might have been all just arranged, to fit into this government slot, but this is a deadbeat dad. This is a person who prior to that also, I was reassured by my attorneys that I got the best possible, child support. And I on paper got 3 years of $300 a month extra for alimony, supposedly recognizing my 7 years at home as an at-home mom. However, a year after that, he claimed unemployment falsely. I know now. It's too late to, I'm not going to litigate.
If he identified as unemployed, then we should honor that, right? Because that's
right. Even though you have a contract to get paid for your special work as a crystal reports writer, which is some kind of tax.
It's just astonishing to me what these guys are getting away with.
$700 a day.
Yeah,
He's claiming to be making minimum wage.
It's to me, it's just so frustrating because they're exploiting a system that was designed to help women in all different ways, and children. And then I think about your sons, and I think the 10 years is probably right. Yeah. But at this point, you're considered the hateful bigot for being concerned about the fact that your husband lied to you, took on a false identity, is impersonating something he's not. And your sons have aligned themselves with Nettie because they view him as the victim and you as the oppressor, because that's the narrative. And
the because part is not something that I thoroughly know. We can extrapolate that. However,
based on the ideology.
Yes, but it is also stamped and sealed by the fact that my sons both work at tech companies. And in 2015, that's the year when I felt the change, the cool attitude towards me, because the tech companies and a lot of companies started making policies about putting pronouns and in, you know, saying the T got added to company policies. And so I think that with some justification that my children could be saying, I can't associate with you because I'm afraid that I could be canceled. It's entirely possible. But I think that they also, I know that there's been, you know, individual therapy that they've been involved in as adults. And I think that therapy is also brainwashing, and that I'm not supposed to tell them. This is the single mom, you know, conundrum with any, for any woman who was betrayed by her husband, whether it's, you know, gambling or, you know, visiting prostitutes or affairs or this, or having a secret cross-sex fantasy. You are not supposed to share any of what you've been through with your kids, because the therapist will say, well, they're burdening you with all of the adult stuff and you're not, you know, supposed to share this. But on the other hand, they were there. They were there when that lady called me the nanny, and she said it with such conviction, right? Like, and this is, I think it's just a telling moment, right? When I'm sort of being accused of deception and possibly coercion or something quasi illegal or whatever. And whereas Nettie is doing all of these things, and the way that it got in was Nettie volunteered to be the class parent as soon as we separated and stuff like that. And he did this really disreputable thing of structuring the class, that one of the things that the class parent volunteers to do to save the teacher time. I know this because I was a teacher, and I think I set up my own list because I just wanted to, but so Nettie did, you know, the children's name on the left, and then, and it happens that, you know, our son's names start with letters not at the end of the alphabet, so they were kind of up there on the top, and then Nettie's name is, of course, the first name, you know, in the same slot as the child. And then I'm an orphan parent. I'm a grass widow orphan parent. Mother.
You're not even listed with your,
because there was no name in the box.
There's not
That's
room
why,
for second, for real mother and fake mother.
Right. But other people who were divorced, who had two addresses listed, they were all in the same box with their child. So I was this loner who got listed differently. And the kindergarten teacher, the first year that this happened, the kindergarten teacher was really upset about it. She was an older teacher. She, you know, was very happy to give off a task like that to a volunteer parent, but she was really, really upset about this. And she tried to kind of white out the line and change it. And Nettie caught her at this parent thing, and then brought in an attorney who threatened this teacher. Like, Nettie did all these things to the teachers that really outed himself. And that's basically, I had written what I call the trilogy of truth to my children before, the year before I started writing my memoir. Right before Thanksgiving, I just needed to tell them, you know, you have to understand that the way your father behaved outed himself,
Right,
as someone who was doing something not usual, right? And so
Well, and this
There
is
was,
the conundrum, I think, of women in your position, and
yeah,
and in general, any couple who's involved in a divorce where a parent is involved in alienating the other parent, is that
yeah,
all of the experts say that you're supposed to not say anything negative about that parent, and if
yes,
you, then you're, but if you're a parent who's willing to engage in bashing the other parent, the kids are going to believe you. And that's
right.
something they
And
don't talk about in the literature. The parents
right,
will believe you, and the parents are, or the kids are gonna, it might take 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years for the child to wake up and realize, oh, all those things that were said about my mom aren't true. And it turns
Mhm.
out the guy who's been telling me all this is the one who's maybe not somebody that I
was the
should,
manipulator,
who's the
right? Yeah,
manipulator, right?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, and I do remember, like, this every once in a while something comes back to me. Thank goodness, not like it was when I was writing the memoir, but because that's difficult. I recommend doing it if you've been through trauma. I really recommend putting yourself through the memories, and then consciously, the way I structured the book was that I go out in the woods and I observe all these things and take a break from that, and then some true tale filters back, and I warn the reader by saying, this is the true tale of the
And
class
I wanted to
list.
just, for those who haven't read it, I wanted to just sort of, my impression of it when I was reading it was sort of walking in the woods with a very dear friend who
Oh,
was sort of telling me about, this horrible thing that had happened. And it was so organic the way it, it wasn't, the way it was structured was so sort of that way that good friends talk when they're out in the woods walking.
oh, oh,
And
thank
so,
you.
yeah, so
Wow.
I really felt, I mean, it was very intimate. In some ways, I almost
Yeah.
feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I know you so well,
Oh,
because of how it was written.
well, you've
But it
shared a lot
also,
about your life too.
yeah, but I also feel like the way you went into how you were curating the woods also
Yes.
allowed that sort of like, there was like this heaviness, but then there was like this ability to breathe a little bit, and to realize that you made it through this in such a healthy way. So I just want to encourage people to read the book, because I
Oh,
do feel
thank you.
like it really is a beautiful book. And
Yes.
I don't tend to like, I tend to like more I guess I call them like textbooks.
Oh,
That's more my thing.
yes.
I like
Yeah, yeah.
textbooks.
Right.
And so I typically don't really enjoy this kind of memoir kind of thing. But
Uh-huh.
in this case, I really, because occasionally there'd be like this, this is a true tale, and I'd be like, what? But then you'd like walk me back into the woods.
Right. Right. I felt like, I lived it, but I cannot chronologically put a reader or myself through those years, and through those really 10, 15 years. um and it was just because the ideology has become so dominant and social media has sort of made it into a different kind of situation. um it's until I wrote it down,
Mhm.
it was really running around in circles in the back of my head.
Hmm.
And whenever I would start hearing about these male athletes inserting themselves into female teams or something like that, like for us grass widows, this hits us,
Mhm.
right? Because we had this man inserting himself as a woman into everything in your personal life, right? And there were times when I felt like with some of the special education work that I did, some of time, which was stressful and difficult, I felt like, oh, but thank goodness for my job, because I'm so
You get
thank
away
goodness
from
for
it.
this difficult job and this tantruming 5-year-old, because I'm good at this.
Mhm.
I feel competent, right? And somehow everybody becomes incompetent when they're dealing with this.
Mhm.
And it's mental illness.
Mhm.
That's how I feel
And
about it. And
that's why everybody feels, I mean, it's disorienting. having these, I just was kind of joking around with somebody about this documentary that Matt Walsh recently put out,
Oh, right.
where a pediatrician asked, do chickens cry? Do they commit suicide, in response to one of his questions, as asserting that chickens have gender identity, but they don't have an awareness of their self-identity, so they don't experience gender dysphoria, but it would be possible for us to. I mean, it was just this,
It was
it's
like,
so convoluted.
why are we talking about chickens?
Well, and it's just, I mean, it makes no sense. How can you be something you're not? How can you, as the mother, not be allowed to be a mother, but somebody who, I mean, it's all of this.
Right.
Well, the term that you've used often, Erin, is crazy making. And
Yeah.
like that is
Yeah.
what this whole ideology is, just
Right.
crazy making. And when we talk to parents who this is happening to their kids, a lot of times they'll say, you're the first organization or you're the first person who has told me I don't have to affirm this. And the thing
Yeah.
they say over and over again is, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. Thank you
Yep.
for telling me I'm not crazy.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yes, yes, yes. I remember an attorney saying to me, because the stuff in court was so egregious, with all kind of accusations, like, something that had happened years before, where I grabbed the vacuum from him and said, don't yell at our child. And that turned into that I swung the vacuum at him and I attacked him. And it was perfectly okay to make this accusation in court, when I wasn't doing this kind of thing. I was saying, why are you moving so fast? Why are you doing this? And, with, it's just, and then this one attorney said, it's like, he comes up and kicks you in the shins.
Mhm.
And you don't get to say, I'm going to call the cops. You just assaulted me. Instead, you're hopping around on one foot and swearing and cursing. And he points the finger and says, look at her. What a mouth. She's out of her mind. Look at that bad language. She's the one who's really crazy. And it's like, uh-huh. And I mean, it's remarkable. It's remarkable.
Yeah, we're in just such a bizarre state of affairs right now.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel very sad for children who are caught in this, because
Mhm.
they are not allowed to express this confusion.
Right.
They have to go along with it. They're punished if they don't buy into it. I mean,
Right.
it feels to me like, well, it is. A cult has taken over
Yeah.
our society. And when you read books about cults, this is a cult. I mean, it's doing all of the things that cults do.
Right. Right. The love bombing.
Love
Yeah.
bombing. Anybody who disagrees is a hateful
Right.
bigot, and
Repetitious
threatening, and
chants. Yeah.
misgender someone. It's a violent act. I
Yes.
mean, all of this is
Right.
straight from cult playbooks.
Yeah.
And yet, those of us who are watching it, or who experienced it in any way, I mean, I feel like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I keep waiting to see, what's
Mhm.
going to go down next. What's the next organization? Who's the next person? What's the next policy that's
Yeah.
going to come along, that the cult has, just keeps, it's like a domino,
Yeah.
just taking over our society. At some point, I mean, it's untenable. None of this makes
No.
sense.
No.
And at some point it's going to fall, but there are going to be
Mhm.
so many people damaged in the process.
Oh, yes. Yes. And I remember, I mean, this was you contributed to some real thinking that Erin, that I feel has in a way changed my life. I mean, you interviewed Dr. Miriam Grossman, and I got in touch with her after that. She wrote me some encouraging things, and she just said, I cannot believe what my profession has done. And I think I wrote to her and said, I believe that this is eventually going to be revealed, when it gets debunked, as a scandal to rival thalidomide.
At least.
And she wrote back to me and said, it will be worse. And it's like, oh my goodness, this was in my special ed training, the damage that thalidomide did to unborn children.
Yeah, my
And
daughter and I were just, we were at the Smithsonian Museum, the American History Museum last week, and walking around looking at all the displays, and there's a display on girlhood. And what do you think is in there? There's a whole section on trans in the display on girlhood. But I told my daughter, I said, I really believe in 10 or 15 years, there's going to be a display on this period in our history. And it's going to be portrayed for what it is, a mass cultural brainwashing that has destroyed a generation of people.
yes, yes. Well, I'm encouraged by what you're doing. And, we can always meet again and talk about some other aspects.
Maybe in a couple of years. I feel like it's interesting watching this evolve, because it has gotten crazier than I ever expected. And so in some ways I'm optimistic that we're at a tipping point, because can it get crazier? But if you had asked me 2 years ago, could it get crazier? I'd say no, and it has. So part of me is very optimistic that we're almost through it, but part of me is scared to death that this is just going to keep pushing through society, and we may not be around when it finally fails. I mean, that's and I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I hope so too. But I think, every voice speaking out truth and reality is powerful. And Ute, I think your book is very powerful. I think it's going to be a gift to other women who've gone through this. And I think it's just going to be a gift to society at large, because when people start waking up, they start looking for resources, and your book's going to be there. So thank you very much for writing.
I really, really appreciate that. Well, people can go through the contact form at my blog, uteheggengrasswidow.wordpress.com, and they would have to give me their email, but I'm very,
You're trustworthy.
I'm very trustworthy. I've been fingerprinted lots of times. They have 3 New York State.
Well, you worked with kids, so hopefully
but they can get a code. I think it's a little bit of a marketing thing from my publisher, iUniverse, but so you might have to answer some marketing questions, but you can request a code from me to get the free download of the ebook. Yeah, and I've got quite a few of those, and I have put some of the codes up on my blog, and I honestly don't know whether people have claimed them. I've decided that I'm not going to start really worrying about whether or not my book is selling. I told people, for what this is a self-published, by the way. I paid some money to do this, and especially a little more money when I realized I really want the nature pictures to be in there. Because
they're beautiful, and because they're kind of intertwined with your story, it's really nice to see the pictures. I looked forward to seeing them. So
well, you're my favorite reader so far. You too.
Well, we will, and we can put links to your book and to your website below the video so people can find you. And thank you so much for what you've done and for talking with us today.